This is one of the books in the series called the Queensland Statutes. As many of them, they're published each year, and that used to be the way in which the legislation was made available to the public. These days it's also accessible through the internet, through sites like Ostly. Now, these red books were the Queensland Statutes, and they covered all the laws which the Queensland Parliament had passed from 1828 right through to the present day. And the result is you've got lots and lots of legislation there. Now, this week, in week 4, we look at how legislation is made, how an Act of Parliament is created, and the stages, how it starts off as a bill and it goes through the Houses of Parliament, or in Queensland there's only one House of Parliament, isn't there, Robolawyer? That's the Legislative Assembly, because way back in, I think, the 1920s sometime, Queensland voted to get rid of its upper house of Parliament. So Queensland Parliament doesn't have a Legislative Council. All the other state parliaments do. Yes, at federal level, that we've got the House of Representatives and the Senate, that's right. So what we're looking at this week is how they make this legislation. It can be legislation about anything, any topic where the government wants to make the legislation. Unlike the doctrine of precedent and the common law, where it's the laws set out in the decisions of judges, here the laws set out very clearly as the intention of Parliament, and it's all written down and prepared. And it can be changed, yes, they can change it, they can amend a statute when they want to change parts of it. And quite often, when you go to the legislation or the statutes in Ostly, you'll see consolidated acts, and that's the statutes with all the legislation and all the amendments in it up to date. And then they have numbered acts, and some of those, the numbered acts are the acts which the Parliament passes each year and the sequence in which they pass them. A lot of those acts actually amend earlier acts. So the law keeps changing. So one of the good things about having the law on the internet is we know we can go and look for it, because in the olden days, Robolawyer, in the olden days, before we had the internet, people used to have to go and look through hard copy to work out what the law was. They'd have to find the original statute, and then they'd have to go and look to see if it had been amended. Now, sometimes they'd put the government printer would put out a reprint, but quite often it didn't. Apart from statutes, the other thing you need to learn about this is how the courts interpret statutes, because you might think it's fairly easy, everybody knows what the words of a statute mean, but sometimes there's a degree of uncertainty, and as a result the courts have developed a number of common law rules for interpreting what phrases and words and terms in statutes. And that's right, the Parliament's also passed an act called the Acts Interpretation Act, and that gives us rules about how we work out the meaning of what terms say in a statute. Now that's all meant to be very helpful, but still sometimes there are areas of confusion. Now, I tell you what, Robolawyer, I found this really good reading in the readings, and it covers, I think it's reading 3 point something. It covers the doctrine of precedent and statute and statutory interpretation. The last thing I want to mention is this idea of delegated legislation. And delegated legislation is the law which is not made by Parliament, because Parliament, when it passes the Act, gives the power to make certain laws to a subordinate body. It may be a government department, it may be the minister, and those laws are called regulations, ordinances, or whatever, and they don't have to go through Parliament. Generally, they're very technical laws, and they're published proclaimed in the Government Gazette. So sometimes when you go to a database, and you'll find SL abbreviation, that means it's subordinate or delegated legislation, and you need to check that as well. For example, all the local laws of the local authorities are considered subordinate legislation because they're made under the authority of the Local Government Act. Taken all that in? Well, look, Robolawyer, I hope you go and do those readings in the resource materials, because some of those readings are very, very helpful. I'm sure people out there, well, the smart people out there will be doing them, won't they, Robolawyer? Yes. Okay, yeah. Well, some people said some nice things about you on the discussion board. Yes, yes, they did. I think you might be a hit again this year. And yes, there are your back video. Last year's videos are up there too, and they can see you there as well. Anyway, you say goodbye, Robolawyer, for this week. Goodbye.